Hey everybody, Pat, we just got a chance to hear your newest talk about the 6 types of working genius, and it's so fun to get to engage with. And we have Krista here, and we're gonna have a great conversation about this book, about the model, about all the things that you've learned in writing it. And we have some questions that when people signed up for this event, they got to submit. We've got a bunch of stories we're gonna tell, and all in just a few minutes. So Pat, of course, the author of the 6 Types of Working Genius, and Krista is one of our table group consultants. And there might not be anybody on the planet who's used this more out in the world with teams and leaders. So we're going to just dive right in and talk about this book and this model. So you talked about this in the speech, that this is a bit different in that you first came up with the model and the assessment, and then 2 years later, you have the book. And, I'm so curious, what are some of your favorite insights that you were able to put in the book from having hundreds of thousands of people take the assessment, from being able to certify people, from starting this Working Genius podcast? You've had 2 years of rich insight about Working Genius. Any favorite things jump out to you?
Wow, there's so many. It would be hard to narrow it down to, but the stories we got from readers, or from users, I should say, that took the assessment and told us how it changed their life, whether it's their family or in their church or of course in their business, those things made its way into the book.
Yeah.
So usually I write a book when I come up with an idea, and then we hear from people later. But because we did the assessment, we got so much feedback from people, and that was able to make its way into my thinking about everything. So there might be a character that was inspired by that. Certainly my experience with my wife made its way into the book, because we got to play with this, she and I, for 2 years before the book came out. So I don't know if there's a favorite one, but of all the books I've ever written, I had more personal experience with the material that I got to incorporate in the fiction as well as in the back of the book.
And that really comes out. I think some of the stories that I've heard you light up about are stories like Max's story in the fable, where somebody thought they just weren't a fit, that this job couldn't be a fit for them, and then they discover their genius and kind of light bulbs go off.
Hearing stories about people who were going to be fired, or companies that were like, we love this guy or this gal, but we're going to have to let them go because they're not being successful. And then they realized they were in the wrong job because they didn't know their working genius. And that not only saved their job, but it helped the organization and the team. That's one of my favorite things. And one of my favorite scenes in the book is where they take this guy who they were going to probably let go, and they realize, no, you should be in a different job.
Yeah.
And I love that concept.
It's incredible. Now, Krista, you've been part of Working Genius really from the beginning and given lots of feedback, and your insights from being out in the field have informed the book, informed a lot of what we're doing. I'm so curious for you. You've sat with teams not only through a pandemic and through the Great Resignation and all of those things. You've been with teams for years and years and years. And I'm curious, and I think people would love to hear, what are some of the problems that teams are facing that Working Genius is helping you be able to address?
Burnout. I would say turnover is another big one. And so they've got new teams forming, kind of becomes the opportunity when they realize what's at stake if we don't get this right this time. So those are often the problems that they're talking about. And even just, we're going through the fog of what is this new normal, what does this new work environment look like, and we have to be really productive, probably with less right now. And this is helping teams move forward through that fog.
A woman came to me right after my talk today and said that she works with nurses. She consults in healthcare, and she said this is going to allow them. They have nurses that are kind of burning out, but they don't know why. And she said, I realize we're not thinking about their working genius. We think a nurse is a nurse is a nurse. But there's so many different ways to go about it. And she says this is going to allow them to help their people live into their genius and understand the variety of ways to do a job versus cookie cutter and making them work inside the box. She said, I can already see how this is going to avoid us losing nurses who just need to be understood and being given permission to use their genius.
Okay, so I'm going to click into that a minute. When we asked people to register for the event, they were able to ask you a question. And we got a question from a dentist office, and I didn't know you were going to make this reference right here. And they said, how could this apply? Because we're just asking people to clean teeth and fill out paperwork. Like, does Working Genius really apply to a group of nurses who, on paper, seem to have the same job? Like what practically could that look like for them?
Yeah, it doesn't mean that you're going to go into your... People have work to do. And So what it is, it's about understanding them and understanding what parts of their job might be a challenge that they have to be really intentional about, and what parts of their job are a joy to them, and doing whatever you can to let them lean into their joy more, and then to actually appreciate when they're doing something that's not in their area of genius, and go, because none of us have jobs where we get to do everything we always want to do. But like in my office, Matt, he doesn't have tenacity. There's parts of his job that are tenacity oriented. And he says, I'm going to go into my tea cave. And he goes into the room, shuts the door, and comes out 2 hours later. We're like, you made it. Yeah. So the difference between that, inviting him to call that out, and then like rewarding him in a social way for doing that, versus making him feel like he's supposed to love that, is all the difference in the world. Again, this is not about perfection and idealism. It's about allowing somebody to be who they are, and recognizing when they're swimming against the stream that they can celebrate that and just grind through it for a while.
Yeah. Can I add
two
things to that? So I think one is just the conversation of acknowledging your geniuses and your frustration. And then if we think beyond the workday, if a manager was interested in you being happy and what brings you joy, like how can you lean into that even outside of work hours? Because as you said in the speech, we have a third of our day at work, a third outside. Why not have a conversation that thinks beyond just the workday?
You know something? We didn't mention this in the talk. This is so important. The vocabulary of working genius is so important, because when I'm at work now, I will say something to somebody and say, I'm just eyeing right now. I'm inventing. I'm not Gene. Because sometimes I can invent and it sounds like I'm asking them to do something. And at home, my wife can say, hey, I need to wonder a little bit. Because she'll ask big questions, and I think she wants to actually change the way we're living. And she goes, I'm just wondering. Or she'll come up to me and say, I know you're not an E. I need your E right now. Yeah. And it allows me to go, okay.
That's so good.
And it's so much better, because what she's saying is, I know this isn't your favorite thing, but I need it. And now I can actually prepare for it. Where in the past, she would say, can you do this for me? And I didn't even know why it frustrated me. And I'd feel guilty, and I'd probably be more likely to get grumpy. Yeah. So the vocabulary of saying, we're doing some E kind of work right now, and we need you to live in a place that's outside of your genius. Or she'll say, Pat, I have some I stuff for you to do. And I'm like, ooh, good. This is so exciting.
I'm going to get to the book, but Krista, you told me a story. I didn't tell you I was going to ask this, so hopefully it's okay. I think the person's name was Tim, and Tim talked about they'd been in the workplace for a long time, and nobody ever asked about this. Is that enough of a lead-in for you?
It is. It is. Well, just going through the Working Genius with the team, he said in the session, I've been working here for 30 years. No one has ever asked me what brings me joy. Wow. So this gave that entry point in that moment.
Which, are you going to get teary right now?
No.
No.
I might.
But that's one of those things you're like, oh my gosh.
Right.
And you know something? I used to think that's just a tragedy. But if they actually do that, even after 30 years, it's like, well, at least it happened now.
Yeah.
At least it happened now.
We didn't have a model for it before.
Right.
We would have said, oh, what brings you joy? Oh, my children, or being outside, or...
But what about what you're doing?
About your work.
And you know, I want to say this, Bo, which is really important, because people often ask, what's the difference between Myers-Briggs and DISC and all those other things? This one is so tangible. Yeah. It's like, what do you actually like doing? Like, what activities bring you joy and energy? And it's so applicable. It's fast. People look at it and they go, oh my gosh, if I could only do more of that, I would be happier. And it's easier for managers to apply that. It's easier for people to understand about themselves. So what we found is that the speed from making the realization to actually applying it in your life is so fast and so tangible. And I think that's one of the things that's really powerful about this.
It's applied to how we get work done.
Yeah.
And how we overcome those frustrations with having to collaborate to get things done too through other people.
And I love all those other models, but sometimes it's like, I'm an ENFP in Myers-Briggs. What does that mean for my day-to-day work? It's harder to know. But man, when I know that I'm an inventor discerner, I know what parts of my day I want to do, when I'm outside of that, when I have to just grind it out.
You see me, I keep opening the book because I want to ask you a question about the book, but now I want to ask you something else. So Krista, we've heard this a lot. People say, why would I want one more assessment? As you're out there with teams, what are the other objections that people have to even starting the process of Working Genius? Or what are the objections you face with leaders?
Another assessment kind of thing.
Yeah, because another assessment I could see be one of them. Are there other pushbacks that people have immediately to it?
Mostly just that they've already done so many already. Why do we need another one? Or, hey, we as a team have already used and invested in a different assessment.
Yeah.
But now talking through, how does that help you get work done? How does that help you collaborate differently and minimize confusion and increase productivity? I think the fact that this is just 20% personality, 80% productivity tool, talking about it being a productivity tool and helping the teams achieve more results, that really helps.
I love to anticipate people's objections on things. And like for years, I've been doing offsites with executive teams. And from the very beginning, I'd go to the CEO or the leader of the team and I'd say, you know those touchy-feely offsites where you go away and 2 days later you've lost 2 days and everybody's like, it's kind of embarrassing. We hate that.
Yeah.
And so what I like to tell people is, you know what, this assessment, it takes 12 minutes to complete it. And 15 minutes after you get your results, you're going to immediately see the benefits. And so I like to explain, because I know what it's like to take this assessment like an ink block test, and it takes forever. And then the results are like, I don't know what I learned from that. So what I like to do is just say to somebody, here you go, just do this for 12 minutes. And they look at it and they go, oh yeah, I need everybody on my team to know this. Because I can immediately see what we would do differently.
Yeah, the one of the things I love in the story, and for those who don't know, Pat, your books are often told through fables.
Yeah.
So you have a character who's experiencing some pain, and then the model helps them be able to figure out what they should do moving forward.
Yeah.
Is that it's real. It feels so real that the characters are pushing back in the way that normal people do. So even if you're a fan of Working Genius like I am, it was really helpful to me to be able to see how do we talk about some of those objections and actually give space for people to wrestle through some of that.
Yeah, so I remember when I was first asked to write a book about leadership, because I came up with a model, I was like, oh no, I don't want to write one of those business books that's really long and that people won't finish. Because it bummed me out to think, the last 6 chapters, nobody's ever going to read.
Right.
So I was a screenwriter for fun in a previous life, and I said, I'm going to write a fiction book that's relatively short, one plane ride, and that people will keep turning the page, and then they'll get done and they'll have learned it without even realizing it. And so that's what I tried to do here. The other thing is, my favorite thing in writing is dialogue. And when I wrote screenplays, I wanted realistic dialogue. Because you've seen a movie where you're just like, nobody talks like this.
Yeah.
I love the ones where I go, oh my gosh, that's exactly how people are. So dialogue is really important. And so what I try to do is make these characters raw and real. And I like when they say things to one another that the reader is thinking.
Yep.
And oftentimes I'll go back and I'll edit it, and I'll think, oh, I need to edit this. And I'll go to the next page and I'll have addressed it there. Yeah. So I want people to go, yes, I worked with that guy, or yes, that's me. And I really love it when people will resonate with a character who's very flawed, and they'll go, oh, I saw myself in that person too.
Well, let's talk about that. So one of my favorite sections, I'm on page 75. The title of this chapter is Cranky Trigger. And as I read it, I really resonated with it, that this leader is facing a difficulty, and it's not only affecting them, but it's affecting their family. They have the frustrations that you talked about yourself, that there's parts of work that they really enjoy, but so much of their energy is being defined by the parts they don't love.
Right.
And they feel frustrated and cranky about that. And after you shared in the speech, it sounds like a lot of that was pretty autobiographical. Did you also feel that same pressure at home, at church, as you volunteered, about not knowing, your geniuses and what was really needed there?
I think that what I felt was I should have been happier in work, because I worked with great people and I loved the nature of what I did, and I didn't understand why. It wasn't quite as pronounced as it was here, because I really wanted him to have, there was something to lose, which was his wife's patience and the patience of the people around him. So I could definitely relate to that. But I was puzzled by my own dissatisfaction. And I didn't like the fact that other people had to deal with that. So this book, probably more than almost any other, Getting Naked is pretty autobiographical. And this one had a lot about my own experience. And again, I think that was probably because I wrote this a few years after we came up with this, and I was able to really reflect on how this impacted my life.
Okay, so your geniuses are invention, discernment. Your geniuses are wonder and discernment. And I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this, but kind of same question. In your life as a consultant and out there in the business space, what insight did this give you personally about the work that you do?
I think it explained that lack of confidence that I've heard for my whole career as feedback. Like, show up as more confident, build your confidence. And it just helped me understand how I was coming across, even if I felt confident inside, or if I wasn't confident, it's because I was kind of leaning into both questions and using that to help discern things. And so I wish I had that earlier in my career so I wouldn't feel guilty about it.
Because the thing about a WD is that they're called the contemplative counselor. We have on our website, we have a phrase for every pairing. And the contemplative counselor has all these deep insights, and I know other people like this, and yet they're always like nuancing things. They're thinking about, well, what else is there? Maybe there's something else. So they don't come out and they say, this is the answer. They say, maybe this is the answer. And in fact, their answers are really good, but they do not want to overstate it because there might be a nuance. There's other types that will overstate things.
Like me.
Yeah, more so, because you're an inventor galvanizer. You're the evangelistic innovator. And so you'll be like, and you'll sell it harder. And then when somebody challenges you, you go, I wasn't sure that was right, but I just did it that
default.
way. So people can say, why don't you have more confidence? You go, no, I'm just in my head wondering.
Really interesting.
And people will say to you, why are you so confident? I go, because I'm so excited. And it's not a defect, it's a feature. And so that you should not feel guilty for getting so excited. You should not feel guilty for being such a nuanced thinker. It's a blessing. But until you have the words for that, you tend to just kind of say, well, there's something wrong with me.
So Krista and I were looking on LinkedIn and social media the last couple of days for stories, because a lot of people are using the hashtag Working Genius and telling us about their stories.
Which is so exciting.
It's so fun. So I wanted to tell you a couple stories that I thought would be fun to just react to. One person, Jennifer, has the geniuses of wonder and discernment, and we'll share that story with you here. I'll just read a little snippet of it to you, Pat, which is, she shares that discovering her geniuses or wonder and discernment made me feel less guilty about my love of brainstorming and more aware about how I could best help the team I lead. Now, I love this part, now I look for ways to identify high-level opportunities and problems with greater joy and feel less judgment when I need to empower the team around me when it's time to really get things done.
See, it's just like, you have to embrace your strengths, totally embrace your weaknesses, and then you don't feel bad about leaning into some of those areas of weakness because you go, you guys know I'm not great at this, but I'll do it right now, rather than pretending I have to be good at all of it.
Or that other people love it and you shouldn't feel guilty about asking for their help in that area.
So we want to hear other people's stories. Keep sharing your stories.
We love this.
Here's Bradley shared his geniuses of enablement and tenacity. So,
my working frustrations.
Yes. So he shares really poignantly, I'm just going to skip to the middle of what he posted. It's a painful process for me. I've always felt like something was wrong with me, and I was letting my team down by not adding value to our brainstorm meetings. Understanding that those types of things do not bring me joy or fulfillment lets me focus on the things that I do enjoy, the ET stuff. My team now understands what I love to do, so they're better able to pull on me more when we reach the implementation stages of work.
Yeah, he's the loyal finisher. And we need these people, and he can feel great about that. And he can go to a brainstorming meeting and go, I'm going to sit here and watch you guys and say, I don't know how you do this. And then when they get to implementation, they're going to sit there and they're going to go, we want to watch you because we don't know how you do this. It's so cool when everybody celebrates the other's genius.
Yes.
And as opposed to feeling guilty or judgmental.
Yeah, I felt guilty for so long about not being good at the later stages of work. And to hear somebody like Bradley or other great team members that we work with who are saying, oh, can I come in and help now? It allows me to be able to stand taller in what I can do and empower other people in the right way. And it's so simple.
I was so blessed. Thank you, God, for this. When I first started my company, my dad was like very conservative. We didn't have a lot of money. And he was like, I don't think you should do this. You're a vice president at a software company. You have benefits. He said, don't start your own company. I said, oh, Dad, I really want to do that. He goes, okay. And I said, and I'm bringing 4 people with me. And he goes, no. Start earning money before you bring them on. And I remember I didn't know Working Genius. I didn't know anything, but I was very aware of the fact. I said, Dad, I'll never make any money if I don't have people around me because I'm terrible at half the stuff we're going to need to do, and they're not. I didn't know what they were. I just had this intuitive feeling that if I didn't have them around me, it would never work. And I look back now, and I can look at the letters and go, I didn't have that. I didn't have that. I had this. They needed this. And it really explains a lot of our success. Oh, yeah.
Well, so let's talk a little bit more about that. In the speech, you reference the team map of the table group and the company that you lead, and you talk about this in the book. And I also love this section on page 131. It's about reality, and you're starting to talk about, okay, so we've discovered this idea, and how do we put it to work? And the character Bull Brooks in the story is figuring out now what in his family, in his church environment, and in his work, and for his team members, even for what you call the littles, like the newer people on the team.
Younger people in the firm.
So I'd just love for you to share a little bit more about how has this impacted your leadership at the table group?
Oh, well, the best thing is I actually allow myself not to be the chief galvanizing officer anymore. And Bo's a galvanizer and Cody's a galvanizer, and I go, oh, thank you, God. Because I used to feel like, well, I'm the leader, I should do that. And if other people are doing that, that might diminish me. And I'm like, no, in fact, it diminishes me when I have to do too much of that. It changes the way we interact with one another and appreciate one another. It changes the way we give each other feedback, because in the past it felt judgmental to say, hey, this is not your thing. But now it's in their best interest to go, hey, so Matt on our team doesn't have any invention. So he's my son. He's a wonder and discerner just like you. And he'll go to a meeting and he'll say, Dad, that's not a good idea. And I'll be like, well, what do you think is better? He goes, I don't know. I'm not an inventor, but that's not. That would have been kind of annoying in the past. And he's like, no, my genius is thinking through it and giving you feedback. I wish I could do what you do. I can't. And now I can go perfect. So it allows us to staff things differently, not worry about what your job title is, and utilize everybody's gifts regardless of what their job description says they're supposed to do.
I'd love to hear if you have a favorite story or something that jumps out to you about how a team has applied this. In the book, not only do you get to hear, this leaders team and their church environment and their home, but also then the work they begin to do with others. And there's just examples that I feel like people can really, really cling to. Is there a favorite story? And I know favorite's a tough one, especially for a WD. Okay, can you pick a favorite? Pick a story out there to share with us about.
That one or that one, maybe that
Well,
one.
one of the immediate impacts that we see with every team is to their meetings, when they can apply this to meetings. So whether it's the shared language, like you said, or what the purpose of the meeting is really significant. One CEO gave the entire organization permission to decline a calendar invite if it didn't have the stage of work or the required geniuses for the meeting.
Now that's beautiful. It's like, is this a meeting in the beginning? A WI? We can actually we're having a conversation. And I do it at home too. Laura, is this a WI conversation or is this an ET conversation?
We want to let people know how to show up.
Right.
And what does the work require, even if it's neither of our geniuses.
Exactly.
And if we're all about minimizing confusion in the workplace, so that we can increase morale and productivity, it's such an easy, simple tool for us to minimize confusion in a conversation in an instant.
And there's so much frustration when you go to a meeting and nobody quite knows what stage of the work you're in.
Right.
And so one person's talking about, well, we have to land this plane and be realistic. And another person's like, we're missing a big idea that we should be brainstorming about. And it's so great to go, time out. Can we just decide where we're at and let everybody adjust?
Yes.
That's my favorite question, is to what does the work require?
That's great.
Yeah.
And then now we have a map so we can align around the genius that the work requires.
I'm so glad that so many consultants in the world are doing what you're doing and bringing that to people.
Yeah. Okay, so obviously everybody should get the book, read the book. Not only is there a great fable, but in the back there's a lot of application about what this looks like for you as an individual and teams. And we're going to probably dive a little bit more into that now from all these questions from people about Working Genius, what it looks like out in the world and your responses. So Pat doesn't usually see any of these questions before. You like to read through them, but you don't know which ones I'm going to pick for you.
And we had 40 pages of questions come in.
Yeah.
And that's
and we'll
so
probably
great.
get to 39.
We love our readers and our users. They're so passionate.
Yeah, I love it. So high level, what's the best way to begin a conversation with your organization to adopt the Working Genius model? What's the best way to start?
Like if you're a leader, let's say, I think I think the most important thing after you do first of all, do it yourself. So don't say, let's all do, say, I'm going to do it myself. And then I'm just going to share it with people. Because once you do, and I think it's brilliant when you say, here's my working frustrations.
Yeah.
And people will go, so you know? Because they see it.
Yes.
And you go, oh yeah, I don't like this and it drains me. And they're suddenly like, oh my gosh, there's vulnerability and humility in that. and then they go, I want to know what mine are. And so I find that once you show to people what your results are, they're curious about themselves, but it's because you've said to them, I know I'm not great at all this stuff. So that to me is a great way to do it. And then to just anticipate objections. Hey, you guys, this is going to take you 12 minutes. And if people go, but we already did this one and we did this one. Like we worked with a team, Bo, you and I did a few months ago, and we did this with them. And they afterward said, well, we had used the Myers-Briggs in the past. So at dinner, we went over that and we put them together.
Yes.
So and even they said to us, so this is what you love doing. That's kind of how you show up.
Yeah.
And so I say, whatever that objection is, just explain, show it to them, show them what you've learned, and it usually gets people to open up. Does that make sense?
Completely.
That's such an interesting idea to start with showing your frustrations. So let's do this. Let's put your frustrations on the screen for our audience to be able to see.
Mine?
Right now. So they're looking at that. And this is from the newest updated version of the Working Genius report. So when somebody takes the assessment, they can see. And if it's just such an interesting idea to do the opposite of what the world would assume you should do, to be like, hey, boss, have you ever noticed this about me? And so your working frustrations, which we've covered, are enablement and tenacity. And to be able to just see that and be like, oh, you know that about yourself?
Right.
Oh, I didn't have to break the ice to be able to tell you.
Right.
Now, what about if you're like a middle manager, Krista? What if somebody's like, well, I'm not in charge of my company. You know, I lead a team, but I'm not ultimately the decision maker. What would you say to them about how they could incorporate some of this?
Well, I was thinking of a particular woman's story as you were sharing that example, Pat, before. She actually, her big aha moment was her working competencies.
This is interesting. Yeah.
So, and what kind of got me was when she said, Krista, it's unfortunate how good I am at my working competencies. So you, Pat, unpacking how that can be the silent joy killer at work and draining, she then went and taught her manager the model, like laid out the model for him, asked him to guess what her geniuses were, and then turned that into the conversation around, these two are my geniuses, but I don't actually get to use them here, and I've been here for 14 years. But here's the thing. The next step for her was actually tying it to the organization's objectives and what goals they were trying to accomplish. So she had picked out a project that had gotten stuck, and she was like, what if I tried to lean into my genius of galvanizing for the first time and try and get a few of these projects unstuck, and I go and I help this team. So it just got to be part of what she was already doing, job crafting a little bit without having to change a title, without having to roll this out to everybody in the organization, but it created a lot of curiosity.
That's so neat.
You know, in our organization, we had two things that were going on, and it was about competencies.
Yes.
So galvanizing is a competency for me, and for Tracy, tenacity was a competency. And since nobody else had either of those, everybody would turn to us and go, well, I guess you're going to have to do it. And so we were spending most of our time in a competency. It wasn't giving us joy and energy, but it was satisfying a need in the organization. And Tracy was like, you guys, I've been doing we never let her live in her genius because we needed her competency all the time. The same with my galvanizing. So sometimes we think, well, you can do it, but all of us need to get joy and energy from our work. And if we're doing nothing in our area of genius, it's going to be a burnout situation. And you're not going to know why.
Right.
You're like, but I'm good at this.
Yes.
I was pretty good at those things. And I would still get grumpy. And people go, but you're good at it. And I'd get mad. I'm like, don't make me do it.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to hear you say, if the audience had one next step, like what would be the one thing for them to do? And I'm going to want to hear you talk about like any last thoughts or highlights. But before we do that, just want to make sure everybody knows you can go to workinggenius.com. Take the assessment. We talk about this stuff all the time on the Working Genius podcast to get into the layers and intricacies of teams and meetings and marriage and discovering your type and the downsides of each genius. We just get to talk about these things all the time. And I hope it's so helpful for you and for your teams. But Krista, we've heard a lot today. If somebody was going to go do one thing, what would be the one thing you would say to do?
Besides buy the book or take the assessment.
Okay, sure. Besides those things, what would be one thing that you would hope for somebody listening?
I think to share the insight, whatever their favorite takeaway was, either from the speech this morning or their favorite aha moment that they discovered about themselves. And even more beautiful when it's something where we learned how to overcome guilt or frustration. And it just helped us reframe what we've been feeling or experiencing in our life. So I think that just creates a really great dialogue that would generate curiosity and others wanting to understand more, not just about you, but really even for themselves too.
Cool.
What would you say to that?
Well, and I want to just build on that, and it's so fun to see people that are married or friends or coworkers be so excited to understand. You know, St. Francis of Assisi once said, "Seek to understand people more than to be understood." And it's so fun to understand people and to go, "Oh, now I get it." And it turns a relationship that might have even been contentious at times into one of like empathy. So I love it. Share who you are with others.
Oh, man.
And my close to this is this. I remember as a kid thinking, wouldn't it be great if someday I could do work that was actually something I loved? And everybody says that, you know. But I didn't know how to go about that, and I felt like that was a luxury. Like, well, and my dad, God rest his soul, used to say, Pat, if it were fun, they wouldn't call it work. And now I realize that that's not only a luxury, it's something we're meant to do. We didn't get these gifts to not use them. We are meant to, and we should feel like it's our duty to discover our gifts and to put them to use, because it gives us joy and energy, but it makes the world better because we actually get to serve them being the best version of ourselves. And so that's my thing. It's like, don't think that you're not entitled to this. You're actually meant to use these gifts.
So
It
good.
triggered one more. The most powerful next step that I've heard was someone went and actually apologized to a colleague.
Wow.
Because they realized, I immediately understood my bitterness and I owe you an apology.
Wow.
Right.
So I would say that was the most powerful one. If someone had an insight around that you could actually realize, I was judging someone pretty harshly, but now I understand they've got a genius that's actually in my frustration. I should actually be collaborating with that person in a whole different way going forward.
This takes guilt and judgment and turns it into empathy and understanding. That sounds soft, but there's nothing more important in any kind of relationship. And so that's probably the thing that I'm most excited about.
That's so fun. Well, I've learned a ton sitting here with you all, and I can't wait to see the next few layers of Working Genius uncovered, and can't wait to hear everybody's stories out there in the world. Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Krista.
Thanks.
God bless everybody.